After America is made on the lands of the Kure Wurrung, Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, we acknowledge that they and their ancestors have cared for the lands, rivers and sea, and all living creatures for thousands of generations. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded.
We are in a battle for the soul of America.
This is a fraud on the American public.
Hi, I'm Angus Blackman, and this is After America. President Donald Trump is incredibly good at normalising stuff that should be well out of bounds. The way he does it can seem ham-fisted, sometimes even amateurish. But it works.
They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. They poison mental institutions and prisons all over the world.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
Stand back and stand by. It's the enemy from within. All the scum that we have to deal with that hate our country, that's a bigger enemy than China and Russia.
He says, "You're not going to be a dictator, are you?" I said, no, other than day one.
He'll do things like use brazenly fascist language and then back away, or claim he didn't know, or that it was just a joke, or that his version was somehow different. And then he'll often keep saying it, or some variation of it. He's winking and nodding to his base, which knows exactly what he's doing. And he's still at it, normalising and laundering radicalism and undermining previously settled democratic norms in America. A president can only serve 2 terms. It's in the Constitution.
But let's get back to Texas, because you said you were going to say something else. I got the highest vote in the history of Texas, a record that they say won't be beaten unless I run again.
Are you going to run again? The
No,
Constitution
probably not.
Okay.
Probably not. Hey, Becky, I'd like to run. I have the best poll numbers I've ever had. You know why? Because people love the tariffs.
That settles that then. With me is Dr. Emma Shortis, Director of International and Security Affairs here at the Australia Institute. Hello, Emma.
Hi, Angus.
We're early this week.
We are going to take a cheeky week off next week, which meant getting this episode out a bit early because stuff will inevitably happen that we would otherwise miss.
Yes, on some of that stuff that is happening, Trump said he will probably not run for a 3rd term. And it's not the first time he has failed to rule it out. What do you make of it?
So this is the bit where I'm supposed to explain to you the part of the Constitution that says a president is only able to serve 2 terms. They don't have to be consecutive. And these are all the clear legal reasons why Trump cannot run for a 3rd term, right? But we know, because Trump keeps telling us, that he doesn't particularly care for what is written down in the Constitution or really any of the laws of the United States. And so what he's doing, I think, is exactly what you described in that introduction. He is normalising, what should be and what previously was a really radical idea that would undermine the norms of democratic America, and getting people used to the idea. He floats things often as a joke. I probably won't run, and then says he was joking. Oh, you libs can't handle a joke. Look at the way they attack me. But what he's doing is normalising this idea. And he's done it again and again and again with really serious consequences. The one that always comes to my mind is, 1,000 years ago, back in 2020, in that debate where he was asked to condemn white supremacist militias, and he told the Proud Boys, one of the most prominent groups at the time, to stand back and stand by. And of course was pushed on those comments and then attempted to walk them back, saying, that's not what I meant, you're taking me out of context, blah, blah, blah. But of course he was signalling directly to those white supremacist militias, to his base, normalising political violence, and it worked. We saw it work in real time on January 6th, not even a year later. So this is a tried and true Trump tactic, and certainly won't be the last we hear about him running for a 3rd term.
Yeah. So, Emma, you recently headed up to Parliament House to speak to Helen Haines, the independent MP for Indi. And we'll get to that chat in a second. But I wanted to talk to you about some of the wild goings on in the United States domestically first. A couple of weeks ago on the show, we talked about some dodgy redistricting that's going on in Texas of kind of congressional boundaries, electoral boundaries. And so, as a lot of listeners will know, particularly regular listeners, the US doesn't have an independent electoral commission like Australia's AEC. So the shaping of electoral boundaries is a pretty partisan exercise often. But this story is particularly wild. At the time of recording, 50 Democratic members of the Texas legislature had fled the state to block a vote on the plan, which could have seen Republicans pick up as many as 5 additional seats in Congress. The governor of Texas, Republican Greg Abbott, responded by ordering their arrest, and Trump has said he may have to get the FBI involved. What is going on?
Yeah, this is I mean, we keep saying it's a wild one. Everything can't be wild, but also everything is completely wild. So this has all been prompted, you're right, by this effort to redraw the electoral map of Texas. And this has come directly as the result of a request by President Donald Trump, because the midterms are looming and Republicans are worried that they're going to lose their very slim majority. At the moment in the House, they have 219 seats to the Democrats' 212. So it's a very slim majority, and they're worried they're going to lose it at the midterms, which as I've said before, in like a normal electoral cycle, that's what we would expect to happen. And so they're worried. And so Trump has asked the Texas State House to redistrict, basically so that Republicans could pick up 5 seats. So at the moment, they have 25 of 38 congressional seats in Texas, so already a huge majority, and this would give them 5 more. So at Trump's request, Governor Abbott has kind of unveiled a new map that would do exactly this, would give Republicans 5 more seats. But in order to make that a reality, he needs to get it through the Texas State House, where Republicans also have a stonking majority of 88 to 62. But in Texas, you need 2/3 of lawmakers to be present for the State House to do its business. And so Democrats have used effectively what is the only power they have, which is to not be there, to deny quorum to Governor Abbott. So they've basically left the state. Lots of them have headed to Chicago, where conveniently the governor there has old beef with Governor Abbott, and they're having a kind of war of words, I guess, across this state boundary, where Texas Democratic lawmakers are saying, like, issue your arrest warrants, go for it, but they're not valid in Illinois anyway. And it's kind of, the situation is degenerating. Of course, Trump's got involved as well.
My dad used to tell me when I was a kid that the best way to win a fight is 500 yards and 2 back fences. And I like that the wisdom of Al has carried through to Texas Democrats.
Yep. Well, Al's right. But maybe the difference is that they have tried this before. They've tried to put distance between themselves and the State House in order to stop, egregiously anti-democratic legislation from being passed. But it didn't work. They left for a while, but eventually they came back and the legislation was passed. So it's unclear if the same thing's going to happen again this time. Presumably they can't stay outside the state forever. So we'll have to see. But again, just like with, Trump's 3rd term, this won't be the last we've heard of it, not just in Texas, but elsewhere, because Trump and Republicans are also making noise about redistricting in Missouri. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is saying the same thing about Florida, and Ohio also has to do some redistricting. So, this is all part of the broad anti-democratic sweep of the Trump administration and its ability to use, existing levers of power and existing loopholes of the very complicated political systems of the United States.
The U.S. Health Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has blocked $500 million of funding for research into vaccines for respiratory disease.
HHS has determined that mRNA technology poses more risk than benefits for these respiratory viruses. That's why, after extensive review, BARDA has begun the process of terminating these 22 contracts totaling just under $500 million.
In other news, the Department of Health and Human Services in the US is planning to can $500 million in funding for mRNA vaccines, those things that, help us combat the COVID-19 pandemic. The anti-vax health secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., said that mRNA technology poses more risks than benefits for these respiratory viruses. That seems pretty bad.
Yeah, it is. It is really bad. It is unsurprising, though, I think, given what we know about RFK Jr. He is described in a pretty kind of sanitized way in the media, often as a vaccine skeptic, but he's clearly anti-vaccine. There's no other explanation for what he is doing. And this will have huge implications for health research and disease prevention, not just in the United States, but globally. As you said, this is the kind of research, and this specific agency that RFK is stripping of funding is the one that supported the development of those COVID-19 vaccines. So this creates very real dangers for Americans and the rest of the world. And it also has significant impacts on future disease prevention, because this is the same kind of breakthrough technology that is leading to huge leaps in research on combating diseases like HIV/AIDS, to the point where experts believed that they were very close to a cure for that disease, partly as a result of this research. So the ongoing rolling consequences of this kind of withdrawal of funding are really significant, but also quite hard to measure. And I think this is another example where, often mainstream media coverage and perceptions of people like RFK Jr. don't necessarily match reality. In the kind of quote unquote sensible center, people find it hard to believe that, somebody could be so radical and so irrational when it comes to scientific research. But this is part of what RFK Jr. is doing, is part of the MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again, effective kind of cult, really, that takes in a whole swathe of people. And I think it was summed up best for me by Jamel Bouie, who's a New York Times columnist and just an all-round excellent kind of analyst and commentator, who posted that he thinks it's hard for people to really get their heads around the reality that Kennedy is staunchly anti-vaccine, and this is a quote from Bouie, thinks that people should suffer through disease and that those who die deserved it, and that those who survive are a better order of human being. Like, this is the kind of ideology that's underpinning what RFK Jr. is doing, and also, I would argue, what the Trump administration is doing more broadly.
Yeah, it's really scary. Speaking of cancelling things, have we heard anything further out of the US with regards to their AUKUS review?
We have not. So when it was first announced, this review was supposed to last for 30 days. That deadline has sailed past, and we haven't really heard anything since. So there's a bit of panic going on about what this all means. A few weeks ago, and we've talked about this previously, there was some noise in the media that the review was going to come back with two major things. The first being asking for more money, and the second was demanding some kind of pre-commitment by the Australian government to supporting particularly a US war with China. We haven't heard much about that since, and I suspect there's a lot of scrambling going on behind the scenes to avoid particularly that second option, a public demand for a pre-commitment, because that would put the Australian government in an impossible position. But that's really all we know publicly, so we're just going to have to wait and see.
Yeah. All right. Well, Emma, as I mentioned earlier, we were up at Parliament during the second sitting week of this parliamentary term for the new Parliament, speaking to Helen Haines, the independent member for Indi. You spoke to her about her community's concerns about Israel's actions in Gaza, the need for greater scrutiny of the AUKUS deal, and why foreign policy matters to people in rural and regional areas. We were up there on Tuesday, the 29th of July. Hope you enjoy.
Helen, thank you so much for joining us on After America.
It's lovely to have a conversation with you, Emma.
So Parliament is back, of course, but the news has largely been driven by international events in the last couple of weeks. And you've been particularly focused on Gaza, on the protection of civilians and on Australia's role as well. You were there to accept the Doctors Without Borders petition calling for the protection of civilians. So I wanted to begin by asking you what role you think Australia can play in addressing this crisis.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. And you're right. The international context is dominating debate, conversations, interactions in this parliament thus far, only week 2, but leading into that as well. And in fact, leading throughout the election period as well. My electorate is highly aware of the situation in Gaza. I think sometimes we think that when we see protests in capital cities that this is a capital city issue. This is an issue for Australians of all walks of life, and I receive hundreds of letters, correspondence from everyday people in Indi, not campaign emails, individually written emails, deeply distressed and concerned, and right now particularly around the very evident starvation of citizens in Gaza, and most particularly, of course, children. So I felt it was my responsibility when I came to the Parliament to give voice to those concerns, to listen deeply to people like Médecins Sans Frontières, who came and sat with me in this office to bear witness to what they're seeing and what they're trying to do in Gaza. Similarly, Amnesty International, and I was very willing to stand with them as they presented their petition, and that was tabled by Senator Pocock in the Senate and was handed to Minister Anne Ali in the House. So this is a deeply distressing issue. What should Australia do about that? And that's the question that I put to the Prime Minister, to the Defence Minister, to the Foreign Minister, again through letters, through meetings with them, and indeed I asked a question in the House last week.
Give a call to the honourable member for Indi.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Defence Minister. There is a lack of transparency around Australian manufacture of weapons, weapons parts and trade with Israel. Minister, can you guarantee Australia is not complicit in war crimes in Gaza?
You also asked the Deputy Prime Minister about whether Australia was supplying weapons to Israel. What did you make of his response and the response of the government more broadly to that question?
This was a good faith question. It was a question that included weapons componentry. There remains a lot of questions, again, from my own electorate. I get many pieces of correspondence around this. Indi is an electorate where we have ammunition manufacturing. So this is not a strange concept to rural people like those that I represent around our involvement in weapons manufacture. And the question for many of my constituents, and indeed for me, is where do those components, and of course we're all aware that there are components in the F-35 jets, but also munitions, where do they end up? And, the Deputy Prime Minister was, I think, quite aggressive in his response and raised an issue in regard to misinformation and erosion of social cohesion by virtue of the fact that I asked the question.
We are not making weapons for Israel. It is as clear as that. But the point I'd want to make is that we have seen various actors seek to manipulate various information that they have derived, which is in fact not evidence of any of that, try to misconstrue this, try and put out misinformation which goes to suggest the opposite. Now, I want to make the point that to put that misinformation into the public domain does not help one single person in Gaza. It just doesn't. But what it does do is raise tensions in this country, which is deeply destabilising for Australia's social cohesion. I mean, those who walk down that path really need to think about what they are doing for their own self-publicity.
And frankly, I found that a most inappropriate and inadequate response. I asked for some guarantees to give some sense of a line of sight to the people that I represent who care deeply and are concerned that we may be implicated in this way.
Yeah, rightly so. You framed that question as an issue of transparency.
I did.
Partly. Australian foreign and security policy isn't exactly that transparent, as you well know. How have you found working on this issue with the government more broadly, given how locked up foreign policy tends to be?
I think this is one of the biggest challenges of being a representative. It's one of the biggest challenges of being a member of parliament where we can't see and we are not informed around issues related to defence. Now, of course, I'm a sensible person. I know that we can't know everything. But the question such as I framed that question is not an issue of national security. I would not have thought. It is an issue of transparency. And I think the government should be more forthcoming around some of these issues. I really do. This is a big challenge. Defence, more broadly, national security. We all need to be serious about this, but I think that at times governments of all stripes, not just this one, it seems pretty easy to say that we can't talk about these things.
Yeah, I think it's a very convenient excuse. And I suspect that was also why you were one of several crossbenchers to write again to Minister Miles calling for a parliamentary inquiry into the AUKUS submarine deal. Why do you think there should be an inquiry into AUKUS? Is it just about transparency?
Transparency is one component of this, and it's transparency in regard to a massive use of taxpayer dollars. I can't think of any other situation where we would be putting forward that kind of expenditure and there was no eyes on it outside of executive government. Again, my job is to represent the people of Indi. I receive many, many pieces of correspondence about this too. I think that we're in a situation now that looks a little different to when we first signed up to AUKUS. And of course, there's reviews happening in the United States and in the United Kingdom. Why does Australia feel that we should sit on our hands and wait to hear what our other partners have got to say about this?
It's a good question, and I don't think we've got an adequate answer. I mean, I think it's so important as well that you've raised the point that, you know, people who live in regional and rural Australia have an interest in what Australia does in the world. Over your time in Parliament, have you seen a change in the way people talk about foreign policy as independents start to open up the conversation and try and move it away from that bipartisan locked up consensus?
Yes, I have. I think that not only in areas of foreign policy and national security have we seen a change in conversation in the House, different kinds of questions asked, calls for greater transparency. The crossbench has brought this to the House of Representatives and over in the Senate too, where we've got independents there as well. It's a critical area of inquiry that major parties don't tend to engage in because many of these discussions they have behind closed doors in their party rooms. And as we know, you've only got to observe Question Time to know that the questions that get asked from major parties are highly curated by their bosses. And crossbench representatives will bring the questions that the community wants to know about. And that creates a very uncomfortable place for executive government. Again, irrespective of who's in government, I've served here under a Morrison government and under an Albanese government, and I see similar discomfort with some of the questions that the crossbench put.
Yeah, absolutely. You've called for an inquiry into the AUKUS deal, and the Greens just this morning as we're recording have also called for an inquiry, a Senate inquiry into the AUKUS deal. Given the level of discomfort that you've identified, how likely do you think it is that there will be an inquiry?
I think it's highly unlikely. I think it's highly unlikely, and that's a strong message to those who are watching and listening across the Australian citizenry. Crossbenchers in the House joined with crossbenchers in the Senate to call for this inquiry during the election period. We maintain that call. I think that the government should do this. They should open the books for the Australian people to see and understand, and that would ultimately build trust if this is a deal that we can then have confidence in. But I believe it's unlikely they'll say yes to this one.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're right. You mentioned earlier, Helen, around AUKUS that circumstances have changed somewhat since the deal was first announced, mostly because we have a second Trump administration now. that is prompting some big questions around AUKUS, but also around Australia's relationship with the United States more broadly. How do you see that relationship, Australia's relationship with the United States?
Look, I think there's no question that our relationship, our traditional relationship with the United States is different. President Trump brings a worldview that is not entirely aligned with the ethics and values and understanding of democracy and foreign policy that we as Australia hold dear. I think that President Trump has been forthright in his disdain for multilateral organisations like the United Nations, like NATO, like the WHO, for agreements such as the Paris Accord. I think that President Trump shows an inability to comply with what we would consider a rules-based order. And I think that has to change how we see our relationship with the United States, because I still hold dear to those things. I think the Australian people, certainly the Australian government, do. So if you're not aligned morally and ethically, then you have to call into question your relationship, whether that be with the United States or whether that be with other partners.
Yeah, absolutely. Am I right in thinking you visited the US as an MP pre-Trump during the Biden administration?
Yes, I did. In 2022, I was on a multi-partisan leadership program to the United States. It was an opportunity for me to meet with people in the United States, from the State Department, many people, many leaders. It was a trip I really enjoyed and learned an enormous amount from.
How do you see American democracy now, looking back at that
Well,
experience?
I think it would be very interesting to go on the same trip now, and I think I would get a very different sense of what's happening on the Hill. I'd get a very different sense of who are leading key departments. We know that President Trump has appointed some of his own people into key positions in various departments, and I think it would be a very different conversation we'd be having now.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Given how much circumstances have changed, how do you think Australia or the Australian government can or should manage that relationship going forward?
Well, I think the Australian government, I think they are doing this. They're actually looking to other partners in the world. I think that we need to continue to invest time and effort and resources into ASEAN, for example. And we're seeing the Australian government operate, I think, in a way in the Pacific and in our geographical patch in Asia, to build those relationships more strongly. And I think that our view of what security means to Australia has to move beyond our relationship with the United States as being our key port of defence backup, and thinking more broadly about what does national security mean. And of course it means support to our Pacific neighbours on climate change. It means strong diplomatic relations in our geographical patch. It means maintaining our aid to our neighbours. It means maintaining our commitment more broadly to the world around partnering on climate action.
That's a much more expansive view of security than we would usually hear from, I guess, defence types, who often take a very negative view of security as just the prevention of inevitable conflict. It seems as though, one of the opportunities Trump offers us is to rethink our security and what we mean when we think about national security. How do you think we do broaden that conversation to understand, climate, as you said, as an issue of security, or health, for example, as an issue of security?
Yeah, well, I come from a public health, preventative health background, so it's in my DNA to think about prevention, and I think those issues around understanding what security means. We learnt during COVID, didn't we, that we were at sovereign risk when it came to manufacturing essential items, such as vaccines, such as masks and personal protective equipment more broadly. We know that our fuel security has been in question on many occasions. That there are many areas where our security as a sovereign nation can be at risk, and I think we do need to think more broadly. But I'm not naive enough to think that we don't have to have a strong defence capability. So, of course, we need to do that. Of course, we need to ensure that our defence personnel are trained, that we have enough of them, that they're in the right positions, and that we do have the kind of equipment that we require to protect our borders as best we can. All of those things go together. But I think it's critical that as a nation we think more broadly around our national security than purely from posturing on military capability in the same way that perhaps our American colleagues may position us.
Yeah, absolutely. Bit of work to do. Thank you, Helen, for all of the work that you do and for your time today.
Thanks very much, Emma. Pleasure.
If you want to read more from the Australia Institute, you can pre-order the second edition in our Vantage Point series. Dead Centre, How Political Pragmatism is Killing Us by Richard Dennis explores the contradiction between centrism and evidence that sits at the heart of our democratic debate here in Australia. You can pre-order it now for $19.95 or become a subscriber to the Vantage Point series via our website, australiainstitute.org.au/store, or tap the link in the show notes. We'd love to get your thoughts on the show so far. You can send us feedback as well as episode and guest ideas to our email address, podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. Emma's chat with Helen was recorded on Tuesday, the 29th of July, and we're speaking on Thursday, the 7th of August. After America is supported by the Andrew Farron Foundation. We'll be back on Tuesday, the 19th of August. I'm Angus Blackman. Thanks for listening.